Welcome to the Happiness Minute. In this episode, we will discuss perfectionism and its impact on our lives. Perfectionism is characterized by striving for flawlessness and setting excessively high standards for oneself. Join us as we unravel the layers of perfectionism, dissecting its impact on our mental health, relationships, and sense of self-worth. Through our discussion with Tina, who is our guest today, we'll challenge the myths and misconceptions surrounding perfectionism, inviting you to question whether the quest for flawlessness is truly worth the cost. So grab a seat and open your mind to our episode today, Perfectly Imperfect, the journey towards self-acceptance. And today we have the honor of doing this podcast with Tina. So, Tina is a midlife career coach and therapist. She moved into coaching and therapy after 30 years working with human resources and executive search. So, after training as a career coach and counselor, she chose to study for MSc in Integrative Counseling and Coaching, accredited by the British Association of Counseling and Psychotherapy. So this course is actually unique and the only postgraduate course in the UK that offers an integration of counseling and coaching practices. So she takes a holistic, empathic approach, understanding that one size does not fit all. So that's Tina. So hello, Tina.
Hello, it's lovely to be with you today, Anna.
Hi, Tina. Yeah. So Tina, tell me more about you and what you do.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm a midlife career coach and therapist, and I empower both men and women who are at a career crossroads, trying to navigate the emotional and practical struggles preventing them from taking action and creating a more aligned and confident way of being in their career and life. And I don't like to use the C word,
Mm.
which is crisis, when it comes to
Ah,
midlife. I prefer to think of midlife as a time of renewal, of growth, and of opportunity. And quite often there are more options open to the next stage of your life than people realize. And my business is Human Decisions. And the reason that it has that name is that a human decision is one when your head, heart, and gut are aligned. And quite often in midlife, it's when your heart and your gut start to talk to you. You know, your heart isn't in it, and you have that gut feeling that things aren't right. And that's sometimes when you have to commit to doing something different.
yeah. So I think today we'll be discussing perfectionism, so which is a very,
Yes.
very good topic. So we'll look at the myths about perfectionism and how do we overcome it and some practical strategies for it. So Tina, my
Exactly.
so my first question to you is, what is perfectionism?
Actually, perfectionism, if you look at the research, is multidimensional in its nature. But what people most understand about perfectionism is what is referred to by the researchers as self-orientated
Yeah.
perfectionism. And that's when we set extremely high personal standards, have a critical self-evaluation of ourselves, and avoid failure. So they're the key, tend to be the key elements. One is expectations that are often out of reach for
Mhm.
individuals, that they're quite critical of how they do their work, or it's never quite good enough for them. But the baseline is normally avoidance of errors and failure.
Okay, so in terms of that, you think like perfectionism has a big influence in one's life, personal life. So does it does it really influence the things that you do in your life?
Yes. And interestingly, the research shows that it probably manifests more in your work life than any other place that you actually spend time. So I think it can be really important. And one of the things that I did when I was on my MSc is spent a year researching
Oh, good.
perfectionism. And one of the areas that I was wanted to find out about was what was the impact in the workplace of perfectionism. I mean, there are lots of research around it impacting anxiety, potentially depression, and mental health. But it can have quite an impact in the workplace as well, because that sort of those high standards mean that sometimes you might want to do things to the point where you miss deadlines and goals.
Mhm.
Um, some people can focus on the detail rather than being pragmatic. So the 80-20 people who are perfectionists try for the 100 rather than potentially getting things good enough. They will tend to work longer hours, and they can sometimes have an inability to be flexible and procrastinate as well. So all of these things have quite a big impact on you as an individual, potentially in your working life.
Yeah, because I do believe, like, as an adult, you spend most of your time at work anyway. So I do
Yeah.
believe, like what you said, it does show when you are in your work environment.
Hmm.
So do you think that actually, because it shows in the work environment, does it really affect you as a person in terms of your happiness and growth as well as an individual? Because, I would say that um, when you strive for perfection, it would, sometimes if you don't meet it, you feel hindered. I felt, I do feel that way sometimes.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's even if you do, some people who are perfectionists find it really difficult to deal with praise,
Mhm.
because even if they've done a good job and other people think it's really good, if it hasn't met the mark that they've set for themselves, then they're still not satisfied. So to some extent, there's this constant sort of dissatisfaction with the work that they produce. And that's not a very good feeling to have. And that's where some people suffer from anxiety, because um, they're anxious that they want to be good enough, but if they don't actually reach their own personal expectations, that's never achieved. So there's potentially that constant sort of anxiety that leads to overwork. A lot of perfectionists will work late, reiterate things over and over again. And there is research to back up that, there's correlation between perfectionism and burnout as well.
Burnout, yeah.
Because, yeah,
Yeah. Because that would be like some warning signs. I would say that someone is struggling with
yeah.
perfectionism. So are there other warning signs wherein they don't really realize it, but they're on that?
I think there's Yeah, I think it's sometimes difficult for people who are managing perfectionists, because there are two things that could potentially manifest. One is the sort of anxiety and the sort of
Mhm.
mental health side of things. But you've also got the other side that they might actually produce really good work, but it's not quite on time, or it's
Mhm.
always late. They may also not want to share iterations of the work. A perfectionist, because they don't want to make mistakes, will try and keep control of the work and won't necessarily share what they've done halfway through to get feedback.
Okay.
So they're not always very open to feedback, either, and can at times be less collaborative with other members of the team because they're trying to keep things to themselves.
Yeah, it's sort of like a control for them. They want to
It
make sure
is.
that's everything should be controlled.
Exactly.
Um,
Absolutely.
so having said that, how do you differentiate between just striving for excellence and being a perfectionist? Because they're two different things. I
It
always think,
is. Yeah.
how do you differentiate between the two of them?
Well, I think how they're driven, what the drivers are behind both, because I think that the driver behind perfectionism is fear. So, what
Okay.
sits at the bottom of perfectionism is fear of failure. Whereas if you're striving for excellence, you're driven to excel.
Mhm.
And the difference between the two is that you might set stretch goals if you're trying to achieve excellence, but if you're a perfectionist, you'll set unattainable goals. And if you're striving for excellence, you will want all the help you can get to get there. So you will seek feedback. You might be quite flexible in your approach. You might be sort of quite self-aware and collaborative. So if you're driven to succeed and excel, they're more likely to be the sort of behaviors that you'd see with somebody, because they would reach out for help. I want to get
Yeah.
to that next marker. Who can help me? Who can I collaborate with? Can someone give me
And then
feedback?
they're not really afraid of failure. I would say if
No,
you're striving for excellence, you would probably be looking at, oh yes, I failed, but I can do better. And I think
exactly.
that's how people striving for excellence are, rather than being a perfectionist. Yeah.
Exactly, because failure's part the way there. Fail
Mhm.
quickly and get better. Fail forward, is part of achieving excellence. Doing things to find out and learn. Whereas a perfectionist maybe procrastinate. They may not want that feedback. If something's at an early stage, they may want to just get it right. So they're gonna avoid the feedback. They're going to seek control, and they might overly focus on the detail and be quite
Yeah.
self-critical about themselves as well. And I think one of the most important things about that is, this came up in my research, it can be quite isolating, and
Hmm.
people can become quite lonely as a perfectionist, because it they just keep everything so close because of the control.
Yeah. And you mentioned something about it does have an effect on mental health.
Yes, yeah,
So what are the common like issues that they encounter? You mentioned
yeah.
anxiety. Are there other ones as well
Yeah,
that
it
could?
tends to be anxiety, which is what's coming ahead. So, am I going to get it right? Can also
Mhm.
be depression, and that can be focusing on things that have happened in the past, perhaps that haven't gone as well as they wanted. So, depression seems to be is about what happened previously and worrying about the past. Anxiety is um, worrying about the future, but burnout and poor work-life balance as well.
Mhm.
So, and stress just generally. And the thing is, with stress, it has a huge impact on what we call our autonomic nervous system.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's when we go into fight or flight or freeze. And the thing is,
Yeah.
a perfectionist, they will often freeze
They
and not be
freeze.
able
Yeah.
to do the work, which leads to procrastination. But when we're in stress, a whole heap of things are happening to our bodies, you
Mhm.
know, and sadly, it prevents the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, from actually working effectively to enable you to problem solve. So if you're in a state of stress, you actually preventing yourself to some extent from actually doing the thing you actually want to do, because you've got the
Yeah.
cortisone and hormones and
Yeah.
adrenaline coursing through your body, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think like also when you're a perfectionist, you tend to be low in energy as well. Like sometimes like you feel, oh, I need to do this, I need to do this, but in effect, you're actually losing the energy to to do the things that should
Yeah,
be done properly. So yeah,
yeah.
I agree with that.
And that's
Yeah.
quite sad, because we often get energy from doing things. A
Yeah.
lot of people think motivation comes, we wait for the motivation and then start. But sometimes you need to start and take action, and the motivation comes after that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
perfectionists will often hold back. They might delay. If a project's due at the end of the month, they may not start it till right near the end,
Mhm.
because they're concerned about doing it properly, and then they're trying to do it all at the last minute.
Yeah. One of the things that because the thing is when you're younger you tend, well, when I was younger anyway, I tend to be more of a perfectionist, but I learned a lot in managing that as well. So I think, what do you think on, like, in your opinion, do you think societal pressures and cultural standards do play a part in
I think they do.
perfection
I think it's important.
perfectionism?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand how it develops, because part of it quite often it comes early in age, when we're quite young, potentially, when the brain is developing. And that can come from parents. And that's just not around, parents who are perhaps demanding and perfectionists themselves, so that children actually see that that's a way of doing things. But it can be when a parent is distracted or overwhelmed, and the child may actually try and do things perfectly to
Yeah.
actually regain control
Hmm.
to some extent. So it's very much a case of a protective and survival mechanism to some
Oh,
extent within a family environment. And I don't mind sharing this briefly
yeah.
with your audience, because I think this is an important point. My mum suffered with mental bipolar all her life,
Mhm.
called manic depression, when she was younger. So I had a mum, and I was never certain of what the emotional environment would be at home. It wasn't always easy. So when I look back, I know that some of my perfectionist tendencies, which I have now, I'm going to use the phrase, have learned to dance with.
Ah, yeah, you
Yeah,
need to always dance.
yeah. So I've actually learned to sort of dance with my perfectionism, own that it's part of me, and deal with it. But I know where that part of that's come from. I do think culture and media, particularly in the way that we live now, plays a big part as well.
It
I was
does.
I was talking to somebody the other day, who had switched off their Instagram account, for example, because they had developed this way of how they should be living their life. But
Yeah,
obviously, that's just social media froth. Life is
yeah,
complex and messy, but we don't always see that on Instagram. Education, I think, plays a part as well,
yeah,
because especially, here in the UK, the desire to get grades, and actually only getting the top grade is good enough type environment, so people can actually develop through our education system,
mm,
that. And there is some research to show that there are even more graduates coming out of universities here in the UK and and colleges in the US, that there's a higher degree of perfectionism of those people coming into the workforce. So you've potentially got younger people coming into the workforce with more of a tendency to perfectionism. And also, we need to take into account sort of those individuals who are neurodiverse and just maybe
yes,
more highly sensitive, and aware of the world around them, and they may use perfectionism as a way to protect themselves. So at its heart, you know, perfectionism is a protective mechanism, and I think that's really
it
important to
is.
understand, because the mind's fundamentally trying to protect you by
Yeah,
doing these things.
yeah. It's also, I would say, like, because if you're in that state, I believe that also you're not as flexible as you should be. So you can sometimes you just see black and white and
Yeah,
not anything.
completely. Yeah.
Yes. So how do you manage that? So are there some like tips that you can let people or listeners know how they can manage that? Like for me, I with Instagram, I just decided not to do as much, I would say, because I think like for Instagram, you tend to be like it's curated. It's a
Mm,
curated picture of yourself. It's not really that real.
exactly.
So what tips and strategies can you tell our listeners and how
I,
to
I
manage
think
this?
I think the first thing is just self-awareness. For me, self-awareness and self-compassion are
Mhm.
the sort of foundations of change. And I think it's important to understand that these behaviors are sort of become familiar behaviors. So the brain actually knows this is how you operate all the time. It's like a program running in the background. When X happens, this is what we do. It's really familiar. And it just sort of almost happens on automatic pilot from the brain's perspective. And it's just developed over time. So self-awareness is the first point, and actually just understanding that, yes, this is something that I do, or these are behaviors that I have. And then you need to overlay that with self-compassion. So the first thing is being kind to yourself, you know, and that's quite hard for a perfectionist to do because they're self-critical, but it is talking to yourself as though you were a kind friend. Yeah, and acknowledging that it doesn't make you feel good, you know,
Yeah.
they're the sort of foundations of self-compassion. And then it's sort of challenging some of the beliefs you have about yourself as well, and actually sort of looking for evidence and sort of, just challenging some of the things that you perhaps should be doing. Should's very high, probably in the vocabulary of a perfectionist. I should.
I should.
But the
Yeah.
word should is very, very heavy. And it's working out actually what do you really want rather than what you think you should do as well. But I think one of the key things to do to focus to help support someone with perfectionism is understand what your strengths are. We get so caught up sometimes in the work environment and personally, sort of really shining a light on the things we don't do so well or our
Mhm.
weaknesses. But actually, we've got all these strengths that we're really good at,
Yeah.
things that we're really capable of doing. And the thing is with the strength, it's something you cannot not do.
Mhm.
And I think working with strengths is really important
Yeah.
for
I
somebody
believe
as
that. Yeah.
well. Yeah,
Yeah. You need to be yourself, and you need to capitalize on your strength and make
yeah,
sure to use that more. Um.
exactly. Yeah, because strengths you can um, understand that actually this is what I'm really good at,
Yeah.
and I can do more of this, or I can amplify this, rather than having such a narrow focus on perhaps the things you don't do. I think one of the other things to do is to try not to hold yourself to double standards as
Ah.
well.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
I,
think one of the most important thing is clarification. I think I quite often speak with clients who potentially have this tendency and behavior trait, and they have this expectation of what they should achieve. Yet, with a conversation of a bit more clarity around what's expected in a role, what's expected of a piece of work or an assignment, actually, understanding and questioning the brief a little more. And I think a really good question is, what is a good outcome for this piece of work? What would a good
Mhm.
outcome be?
Should.
And actually taking a steer, and this is in a very practical sense, from, what is expected within that particular, context, rather than overlaying your own expectations
So you
as well.
mentioned a while ago about procrastination,
Yeah.
because there's definitely a link between perfectionism and procrastination. So can we discuss more about that, and how can we as individuals can break this cycle? Because the thing is that you get stuck and like, I'm not gonna do it because I might not be good at it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
how do you break that cycle of procrastination, perfectionism? Because I think they're totally linked.
Oh, completely. Yeah. I mean, that's where the fear comes in. You know, the fear element is if I don't start, I don't get it wrong.
Yes.
You know, if I don't start, then there's nothing to go wrong.
Or I'm
S-
afraid to start this because it would go wrong.
I'm afraid to start it because it may go wrong. I think it's small steps. It's taking small steps and beginning something small and showing you can start. Lots of things. It's around, I can't remember the phrase about eating an elephant. You can't eat an
Ah,
elephant all at once.
yeah.
You have to eat it one spoonful at a time. And I think
Yeah.
procrastinations like that, don't to try and confront it, don't take on something big. Actually pick something small that isn't too out of your comfort zone and complete it. And when you do that, actually the brain quite likes that because you get a reward mechanism because you've actually completed something. And then you might complete something else the same size. Or in work, you might take a small sort of scenario and start it and get some feedback. And see where that fits in the wider context, and do small things at a time. Don't take on something huge to
You start
confront
off with, yeah.
perfectionism, and start proving to yourself that you can do it. And one way of doing that is journaling at the end of the day.
Yeah. And also asking, sometimes because you don't realize it, sometimes it's sometimes quite good to ask for help as well with other
Exactly.
people.
Yeah.
So counseling could be a good option, and also
Counseling isn't,
coaching.
rather than doing it yourself, counseling or coaching, depending on where you feel you sit and how
Mhm.
it's impacting you, either of those can help as well as a reaching out for help. And I actually coached someone fairly recently, and I think that sort of opening up and lessening
Mhm.
the control can help as well. And she was concerned that this particular client was concerned that they were going to promote her again, and she didn't think she was good enough.
Mhm.
And after a discussion, she just opened up a little bit to her line manager about how she was feeling. Not hugely, but enough just so that they was aware of what the underlying feeling was. And that opened up, that was just like a catalyst for
Mhm.
more conversations, her feeling safer. And I think that's important, because perfection is around fear. Actually, having small conversations can make you realize that you're actually in a place that's safe to have those conversations. That isn't always the case within
Yeah.
organizations, but it can be actually, and then you can be a bit more open and share. But a counselor and a coach can help you through that for sure.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. I do have coaches on someone to help me out on certain instances in my
Yeah,
life as well. So I do believe that they can help other
yeah,
individuals as well if they're encountering something like this.
exactly.
Um, so yeah, so I think my last question for you is, what tips and advice would you give someone who's actually feeling overwhelmed by the constant pursuit of perfection in both their personal and professional life?
Yeah. The most important thing is acknowledging it, and
Mhm.
actually just understanding and sitting with the feeling and going, right, this is how I'm really feeling. And try and to pinpoint what the real feelings are that
Mhm.
you are having, because that's the starting point. I think in this world we often get to the point where we try and squash feelings or push
Mhm.
them to one side, and then it's to start to actually look for evidence around what your capabilities,
Mhm.
what is the proof around you, and sometimes just write this down. I actually sat and did this exact exercise with somebody yesterday who
Mhm.
has a tendency to
Good
over,
timing.
yeah, it was literally to over set unrealistic expectations. So we had a discussion yesterday, and literally do a mind map. Put yourself in the middle and write all the things that you have achieved, you've done, the feedback you've had. Because most perfectionists do really good work,
Mhm.
and appreciative of the work that they do. And that's the foundation. Understand what your strengths are as well. But going back to what I said earlier, I think one of the most important, the one thing that just is, I think, is a game changer is seeking clarity.
Mhm.
Rather than thinking you believe what is needed in a certain situation, actually seeking clarity around what is required and what is a good standard as well.
Yeah.
Those are the key things if you're trying to do this yourself. Obviously, if those types of things don't start to help, then you may need to reach out for more support. But I think being kind to yourself, seeking clarity, owning what you're capable of, and identifying your strengths. And there is a really good book out there,
Oh,
um,
cool.
which isn't mine, but it's someone that I know very well. And it's called The Strengths Book. It's
Okay.
absolutely
That's
Amazing.
one thing on my list now.
Yeah, the Strengths book, small, perfectly formed, written by the wonderful Sally Bibb. But if you're looking to sort of identify your strengths, that's a very good place to start.
Thank you. I think that's a good tip.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tina. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank
Um,
you.
and thank you, our listeners, for joining us in this journey. So until next time, may you continue to embrace your perfectly imperfect selves with kindness and grace. Goodbye for now, and remember, the beauty lies in the imperfection. So share, like, comment about this episode, and subscribe to all our social media channels. Bye.
Bye. Nice to see you.